Do you know a quick history of Israel and the region and all of the conflict that has ensued the last few thousand years? Check out this clip from Simcha Jacobovici, and he goes through in a very succinct way just that. So we're going to watch this clip together, but before you do, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
The Palestinian-Israeli conflict is obviously headline news around the world, and because I'm a three-time Emmy-winning filmmaker, journalist who specializes in history, people have come to me and asked me to comment on Palestine from a historical point of view. Okay, from a historical point of view. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people running around today saying we are Palestinians, but from a historical point of view, Palestine never existed. Not once, not for a moment. There's no prime minister, king, queen that you can point at. There was never an independent Palestinian state, kingdom, anything. The Christian Bible doesn't mention Palestine once. The Hebrew Bible doesn't mention Palestine once. The Holy Book of Islam, the Quran, does not mention Palestine once. Why? Because it didn't exist. The area was known 1700 years before Jesus as Canaan. And there were a bunch of tribes vying for domination, in this area where I'm broadcasting from now, the Holy Land. The Jews, the tribe of Judah, won out. That's why we're called Jews. That's why I'm called a Jew. I'm a descendant of Judeans. And in this area, there have been 4 independent states, none of them Palestine, all of them Jewish. In ancient times, Judah, Judea, Israel. In modern times, Israel. So what's going on here? I mean, what's going on here, there was anybody going to church, Easter time, knows Jesus was crucified, and on top, by the Romans, and on top of his cross, they put a sign, King of the Jews, not King of the Palestinians, not King of Palestine, King of the Jews. Jesus went to Jerusalem, the capital of ancient Judea, the Jewish kingdom, to celebrate Passover, the Last Supper, and he got crucified by the Roman occupiers, the Western European colonials that took over this area and dominated the Jews, and they crucified Jesus as they crucified tens of thousands of Jews at the time. Why? Because the Jews were rising in revolution against the foreign occupiers. The indigenous Jews wanted freedom. In fact, the Jewish struggle for Judea is the longest lasting liberation movement in human history. There was no Palestine. Palestine was invented by the Roman occupiers. It's not an Arabic word. It's a Latin word. And why did they make it up? Because they wanted to stick it to the indigenous Jews who were giving them trouble. Judea was Rome's Vietnam. They were stuck here. The Jews kept fighting for freedom. And then, when the Romans crushed the Jews, sold them by the hundreds of thousands into slavery, destroyed the temple that Jesus visited, destroyed Jerusalem, the capital of Judea, destroyed the Jewish kingdom of Judea. Then, after they dispersed the Jews to the 4 corners of the earth, they said, now we're going to stick it to you. We're going to rename your country, Judea, Palestina. Why? Because 700 years earlier, there had been a people, Aegean occupiers, people from the area of Greece, Crete, that had come to occupy Judea. It's in the Bible, the famous fight between David and Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine. David became king of Judea. They couldn't beat militarily. The Bible talks about that hot Philistine woman, Delilah, who tried to seduce Samson, the Jewish hero, into submission. The Philistines were the enemies of the Jews in the Bible. They had disappeared 700 years before Jesus, before the Romans. And then after the Romans conquered Judea, they said, now we're going to show you. we're going to rename your Jewish land, Judea, Palestina, to honor those ancient enemies of yours that no longer even exist. And sure enough, Palestina became a province, not an independent state, not an Arab state, a province in the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire, and then in the Christian Roman Empire out of modern-day Turkey, the Byzantium. And then the Arabs arrived 2,200 years after the Jews. Where did the Arabs come from? They came from Arabia, obviously. And they conquered Judea. They conquered the province of Palestina, and it became part of their empire. And then came the Crusaders, and then came the Ottomans, and then came the British. Always Palestine as a province in an occupational empire. Never an independent state, certainly not an independent Arab state. And then, miraculously, the Jews came back. It's never happened in history that an indigenous people that's exiled comes back like that, reclaims their land. But here's the rub. The British that occupied Palestine in 1946 hacked off 80% of Palestine and gave it to the Arabs. Yeah. Why don't we know that 80% of Palestine is in Arab hands? Because the British renamed it Jordan. And then they didn't give it to the local Arabs. They took a family from Saudi Arabia called the Hashemites, and they imposed them on the local Arabs, and they called it the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. To this day, this happened in 1946, and to this day, it's called Jordan. Get rid of the Hashemites, rename Jordan Palestine, and voila, you've solved the Middle East problem. But you see, that's not how it works. Even though the Jews are on something like 12% of the British-controlled province of Palestine, that's Palestine. Palestine's never whatever Arabs have in their hands. It's only whatever the Jews have. Any piece of territory that the Jews rule, that's Palestine. Why? Because basically the whole point of the exercise is to airbrush the Jews and Judea out of history. Rename Judea the West Bank. The West Bank? What's the West Bank? It's never mentioned in the Bible, in any Bible. In the Quran, it's never mentioned. But don't call it Judea, because then it might sound like the Jews belong in Judea. Just turn history on its head. The indigenous people are suddenly the occupiers, and the occupiers are suddenly indigenous. Again, why? To airbrush the Jews out of history. Why? Airbrushing them out of history is a prelude to actually destroying them physically. It's a preface to genocide. So why are all these people shouting from the river to the sea? Why are they pro-genocide? Why, some 75 years after the Holocaust, people want to do it again? Well, either they're brainwashed by the media. I'm a member of the media, I know how it goes. Or they're ignorant, they're just ignorant. Or they're dumb. Or they're Jew haters.
I think a lot of the protesters don't know what they're rooting for. They're handed a sign and they get with the crowd and they just start marching. They don't know what river, what sea, what anything, but they get caught up, swept up in the whole narrative, and that's where it comes from. That's why they jump on board. I also like the fact that he mentions where the name Palestine comes from. When the Romans kicked the Jews out, they wanted to dissociate the Jews from the land, and they renamed it Palestine in sync with the Philistines, who were the ancient enemy of the Jews. And they were called the Plishtim in Hebrew, but the Philistines in English. But what's interesting is that even if the modern Palestinians want to claim that they are connected with the Philistines, the Plishtim, which they're not, but even if they wanted to claim that, the word Plishtim also means invaders. Like the Jews were there first, and the Philistines were the invaders that were coming in. In any case, love to hear your comments below. And if you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.